Okay. Okay, so hi, good morning to those of you who are in Hong Kong, or good afternoon if you're at a later time zone. Welcome to this sharing session for IB students who are actually going to go into our IB exam very soon. My name is Vicky. I'm here joined by some of my colleagues and also current students at HKU who studied the IB and went through what you've gone through before, to give you some support in this kind of unusual time compared to previous years' experiences, so that we can still contribute towards what you might come to expect with preparing for your IB session. So welcome officially for the session. And what we will do today is we have prepared some questions beforehand to ask our student panel. But we also will welcome any questions you might have as an audience. Myself and my colleague Tiffany, who's also here, will be monitoring those questions, and we will be asking our student panel as they come up. But also first, let me introduce my student panel here. I should start from the top left. Andrian. Andrian is a year 2 student studying in our medical program, so Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery program in Hong Kong. And then the second row, I have Anaka, and she's a year 1 journalism student. And so she's on more of the humanities side. And then also at the last row, I have Kelvin, and Kelvin is also a medical student currently at year 1. So they've recently gone through what you will be going through very soon. And so hopefully they can share some insights with you in terms of what you can come to expect in terms of your time management, in terms of preparing yourself mentally, or even any other questions you might want to ask them at a later stage. Just so you know, the university, for those of you who are applying to the University of Hong Kong for this year, we are going to be looking at your applications. We know the situation is a little bit uncertain right now for some of you in the different regions. So do know that the university is taking care of that in terms of being more flexible with our evaluation this year for those who are impacted by the situation. But keep in mind, we have the deadline extended to July 15 for students who are looking to apply at this point. If your plans were interrupted or if there are other reasons you haven't submitted your applications earlier, you do have the opportunities now to submit those applications. So think about that as a sort of an option before we move forward, as we move forward to answering any questions these students have, because they obviously have gone through the selection process as well. So let me start with our first question. So I think we have IB exam is going to take place in May. That is what we are all told right now. It's just 2 months ahead. So maybe we can start with the student panel telling us, how did you prepare for your exam? How did you arrange your revision schedule? How did you arrange to mentally be ready for that exam? You know.
Does anyone want to take this question?
I see the green box. I see the green box on your screen, so it's you now.
Oh, okay. So I know a lot of people would have their own different, revision schedules and revision methods and stuff. I'll just maybe share what I did. So when it was closer to the exams, maybe a few months, I really took note of my exam schedule. So I knew which exams were first and which exams were last. And what I did was I actually revised. I put more time in the exams that were last first. So it's all quite a momentum thing, actually. So when I'm done revising the exams I had last, then I would move on to the exams I had first. And then right after I finished revising that, it would be the exams for those first subjects. Because within your exam period, those 2 or 3 weeks, or unfortunately, maybe some people would have it all in 1 week. I have some friends like that. But within those weeks, it's not really conducive to your learning if you're going to just cram. All that preparation should have been done now, like in the months beforehand. So that's why those few weeks are pretty much reserved for making sure that you're in the best condition to go into the exam, making sure you're sleeping right, eating right, and yeah, not cramming yourself and not pulling all-nighters for the sake of those exams. Yeah, so that's how I structured like the sort of big picture of how I structured it. Yeah.
So maybe I'll talk.
Sure, Kevin.
Sorry. So I think for me, like personally, I think while there were still 2 months until the exams, it was actually quite hard to stick to allocated time schedules, as like I would purposely make 1 to 2 for English, 3 to 4 for math, but I think it didn't really work for me because I wasn't really good at estimating the time required for each study session, because like I think every task had like a pretty high variability in terms of time and energy required. And so like I think what motivated me and gave me a direction was that I use a to-do list for my tasks to complete every day. And so therefore I would have like an end goal and I would stop revising after that. And I think in the run up to the exams, I kind of split my revision strategy into like 2 phases. However, this was like under the assumption that I had a reasonably solid foundation of knowledge for most of my subjects, and that I'd finish all my coursework. And so I think like 4 to 2 months until the exam, I would desperately try to like ensure I had a really solid foundation of knowledge, and I'd run over the entire syllabus and some exam papers for all 6 subjects. And I think I did some past papers, but the majority of my study was actually based on memorizing and like understanding my revision notes. And so I think the second phase, which was probably in the last month or last 3 weeks, I would just simply do as much past papers as possible, because I think that is what really matters, and that the real exam is actually based on your ability to do past papers in addition to like memorizing revision notes. So that was like my general plan. Yeah.
What I did was like the first half of the day before lunch, like the previous day I'd planned what I wanted to do. I tried to get like around 2 or 3 question papers done every day. So in the first half of the day, I'd revise all the concepts for whatever question paper I was doing. For example, if I was doing an econ paper too, I'd revise the concepts required for that. And then like after lunch, I do one paper. And then like in the evening, I revise some more concepts, and after dinner, I do a couple more papers. So that's how I arrange my schedule.
Wow. Okay. Well, since Annika shared her day with us, maybe Andrea and Kevin, how did you guys structure your day? Like, let's be very specific. Did you wake up early? Did you wake up late? How did your day look like before the exam?
Calvin, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. So I think I try to be organized. So maybe like 2 or 3 months before the exam, I kind of made a big and like overarching plan. And so I aim to cover to have a really good knowledge of all my subjects, and to also do the most recent like 4 to 6 years of past exam papers for each subject. And so that was my idealistic goal. And so I divided everything I needed to do and I spread it out over the 2 months. So therefore, every week I had a rough idea of what I needed to do. And so, as I said before, like I didn't really use time to allocate my tasks, but rather for every week I had a target to accomplish. And this made me really focused and allowed me to have a clear target for revision. And so for one day, maybe I would know like, oh, I'd have to complete 2 paper 1s for English. Then I would do 2 MCQs for chemistry. Then I would do a paper 2 for biology, then probably a paper 1 for math. And that was it. And so I don't really have specifics for time management wise in terms of splitting up the day, but like I would really recommend everyone having like adequate sleep, and also time to relax, time to eat food, exercise, and also watch TV, because I think it's really essential for like mental health and the ability to persist through like such a long period of like studying.
Yeah, on the topic of adequate sleep, the easiest way to do that is if you have like a really like you have you set a standard for yourself, like you must adhere to this like really strict sleeping schedule. Okay, you know what, at 12 I'm gonna sleep, and then I'll wake up early, and then I'll do this. Because what I found was that how you structure your day is really dependent on what type of learning you're going to do, because not like every single subject you do, you have a huge range of subjects, like covering different aspects of knowledge that you learn, and then it requires a different sort of mindset for different subjects, right? So some of them are more kind of creative, or you have to be think out of the box for some of the subjects, but then some of them are, for the lack of a better phrase, you kind of have to slog through the questions, as in like you know how to do it. You need to just train yourself to be able to do it, right? So I kind of structured my day with reference to when I would eat. So there's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I would work until the next meal, sort of. So it's kind of like a really short-term motivation. Oh, you know what? I'll just finish this and I get to eat, and then. But then for mornings, most of the time, it's when I feel most active. As in, like, if you wake up early, you actually feel quite fresh. So you do stuff that requires more of a abstract conceptual thinking. So maybe writing an essay, maybe writing an argumentative essay, stuff like that. And in the afternoon, when you're tempted to go for an afternoon nap, I know myself, a lot of the times I really wanted to nap. When you're kind of tired, but then you still want to be a bit productive, then I tended to do a lot of math practice questions, that type of thing. So I already knew the basic way of using these equations or how to tackle these questions. It's just I need to expose myself to a lot more of the similar questions, so that when it comes up in the exam, I know exactly, okay, you know what, I know how to tackle this problem. So that is trained when I felt more tired in the afternoon. So that would be how I structured my day generally.
Okay, well, that sounds like three very different strategies, and hopefully, it will fit different study styles for students. Let's go into very specific subjects, because I know all of you did absolutely very well in your exam. So let's talk details about some of the subjects you have to do. I'm assuming English is the most common subject done by all of the IB students. Annika, you're a journalism student. So can you share a little bit on your take on English and how did you prep for that? I think I saw a question about that already on the comment, so maybe that's a good segue into it.
Okay. So I took English A, Language and Literature HL. So for both HL and SL, like one common thing is that they both have two papers and they're like similar papers. So I'll just like give some tips on that might be useful regardless of whether you're an HL student or an SL student. So first of all, like one thing that's common is that you need to have a lot of literary devices. So I had like a document full of literary devices, and not just the common ones like metaphor and simile and the things like we learn in like middle school, but also like more like the more unique your literary devices are, the more you can impress the examiner. And another thing is like people think, okay, I have a lot of literary devices, I'm just going to like put them all in my answer. And sometimes you wonder, like, you're writing so much but your marks aren't increasing. So the thing is, it's not just about picking out literary devices from your texts, but rather about applying them better and stepping into the shoes of the author of the text and connecting these things to the target audience and the bigger purpose of the author and things like that. Another thing is, especially for paper 2, which is a comparative analysis, it's the same paper for HL and SL. So you have to compare like two texts basically. So here, I think one thing that's useful is maybe you should make a list of quotes or traits of your characters from different texts, and you can like use these things when you write past papers. You'll see that some themes like love or greed or like distribution of power, they're like common to most questions, so you can apply these themes in many places. So make a list of quotes and themes and everything, so you have like a document full of information about your text, like whatever you're going to write about. Another thing is time management. So you get the question paper and you start panicking and you just start writing. That is very, very difficult, and you won't realize it unless it's too late. So I strongly recommend that you spend for paper 2, you spend like 25 to 30 minutes just planning. If you have like a structure to your answer already, you can like work on that and maybe change it a little bit as you write, but having a structure really, really helps. And also like pay attention to the command terms for paper 2. Evaluate is not the same as compare and contrast. And if there are like, you can see that in the IB guide, I think you can see like descriptors for the different command terms. So pay attention to that. Examiners look at that. Also, like if there are new terms in the question, try to define them, because that's what your answer is going to be based around. For example, I remember I had this question called, how is the concept of strangeness represented in 2 of the works you've studied? So strange is such a vague term, like it can mean different things to different people. So define like what it means to you, and then build your answer around that. That makes your answer like very coherent. Also, there's this course that I did. It's called LitLearn, LITLEARN. If you Google it, you can find it. That was like, it's a paid course online, but it was very useful because somebody who got a 7 in English HL was teaching like how you write answers and how you tackle papers. And that was like very useful to me. So I recommend that you guys check it out maybe. And also like, don't underestimate the importance of doing papers. Only once you keep doing it do you understand your style and your structure and everything, and how you want to manage your time to just, you know, glimpse through it maybe for the last 5 or 10 minutes and everything. Paper 1 and paper 2, practice both equally. If you do all this, I think you'd be set and you can definitely do well.
Thank you, Annika. That sounds like a lot of thought and strategy into how you prep your English papers. So another subject, I think math is another subject that almost all students, well, everyone would have to take some sort of math in the IB Diploma program. Kelvin, you were a science student. Less interpretations, I'm assuming, in math, but what did you do in terms of your preparation?
I think for math, like I did HL math. So like it required a lot of revision, and not only did it do I need to like know a lot of content, but also like over the 2 years, and I'm saying like right from the beginning, you need to really start maturing your skills in logic and your ability to tackle questions. And so I think the number one principle for math is the greater your exposure to questions, your greater your intuition is. And so if you think that you can't really think through a problem, or you think it's really hard, I think it's just because maybe your basics aren't really good enough, or the fact that you haven't like exposed yourself to enough questions. And so there's definitely like I don't think any question is too hard for like an individual. And I think simply doing more questions and seeing more variations of questions in which you could ask could naturally improve like your logic and creative thinking. And I think in terms of like revision, it's quite formulaic. And so firstly, I would start with really basic mathematical operations and questions for a topic. And this is when I was like first learning the topic, and this would allow me to build a very solid foundation. I would then progress to do more questions that require harder thought processes and like deeper understanding of the material and more flexible use of knowledge. I think for me, I use the Hayes and Harris textbook, and also class notes that I learned from class. And these are the main 2 ways to learn content from. And so I think one really crucial aspect of math is that the teacher would explain, and then afterwards we would also discuss between classmates. So this really required active engagement with the content. And I think there's really no other way of learning math apart from just struggling with material. And there are like many methods with this, such as discussing with the teacher, try explaining the topic to a friend, and also just spend time thinking about like the implications for each topic. As for example, for vectors, I would try to visualize like the 3D relationships between lines and planes, and also how different operations worked on vectors. And for like statistics, I would think about like different graphs of distribution, such as like the normal distribution. And also slowly, like one by one, I would change a factor to see how it affected the shape of the graph and also other characteristics. And I believe that these examples illustrate that math is really not rote memorization, and it really requires like a deep appreciation and learning of the material. And afterwards, I would also use like other textbooks, such as like the Cambridge one, the Oxford one, and also I get like past papers from other like revision centers. And so since I already learned the basics from the Hayes and Harris textbook, I would only use the summary and practice exam questions from these other material. And I think the most important aspect is past papers. And I think you should really aim to finish at least like all the past papers of your most recent syllabus, which is 2016 to 2019, I believe. And you have more time, you should really do more, as it helps not only like check your exam time management, but also checks like your approximate level and how much you need to do to improve. And so I think in the end, like doing more questions really gradually improved my like out of the box thinking and my ability to solve unknown questions I've never seen before. And I think one tip is that in the past papers, if it was really hard, I would also note the question down and try to really think hardly about the logic behind the mark scheme answer. And this like not only develops your thinking, but sometimes IB likes like repeat questions. And so you could see the same like techniques and kind of skills used. And so you can like use it in a different past exam paper. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Calvin. So maybe what we will do is we can move on other subjects as well. So we've gone through group 1, we've done group 3. Let's go on to the next grouping. We'll go into the sciences. So Andrian, you've done, I mean, what were your electives?
Okay, so because I wanted to go into medicine, so for medicine, the requirement is kind of surprising, actually. They only require you specifically to take higher level chemistry, but not biology. However, of course, like if you took biology as well, that would be massively helpful. So I took higher level, both biology and chemistry. And yeah, I have some tips for studying these two subjects. Because yeah, for double sciences at a higher level, it can be quite tough. So for starters, yeah, for basically every single subject, not just for science, I think everyone has noticed that past papers are such a key thing. Sometimes, yeah, past papers are key, but they aren't sufficient. As in, you only do past papers, you're not going to do well because you're memorizing the mark scheme or you're memorizing how they mark the answers, but you don't know the substance yourself. So with that being said, going into biology, unfortunately, it is quite heavily reliant on memorization. Just to get that out of the way, yeah, you really need good memorizing strategies. But I find that the best way to memorize and most natural way to memorize is understanding what you're actually trying to learn. Don't learn it for the sake of trying to memorize it. I like to put it sort of like you're trying to paint a really big painting, like a fresco or like a really big painting on a really big wall. And the first thing you do, you kind of outline like, oh, where your painting is going to be or what your big like structures are going to be. And then the rest of the time you spend learning it is refining the details again and again. So how you actually do that is that, for example, in biology, you learn some processes in the body or like you learn some pathways. You might be kind of bogged down on the details and that, yeah, it's really hard to memorize. But then you always have to bear in mind the ultimate purpose or like the ultimate objective, what that process is trying to achieve. Because people memorize or like people understand things through telling a story, like a storyline. So it's almost as if that process itself is a storyline. A does this and this to get to B. So if you always condense it back down to one singular concept, it's easier for you to understand, oh yeah, this minute detail actually helps this entire process. So that is actually the biggest sort of advice I would give. And it's also applicable in medicine, but I don't think it's applicable in this sharing right now. And another thing for biology is that it has these short answer essay questions. And for those specifically, I think it's really, really helpful to look at the past paper mark scheme after you've tried the question yourself, because it's sometimes, unfortunately, it's sometimes marked according to whether you hit the buzzwords or not. Like sometimes they don't really care or they don't really take notice whether you actually understand it or not, or and just not hit the buzzwords. If you don't hit those words that are on the mark scheme, they will still not give you points unless they're quite a lenient examiner. But you're not going to hedge your bets or your future on a lenient examiner, right? So yeah, for chemistry, I think the way I approached chemistry was it was almost as if you're learning the methods, like the mathematical methods, and then you're applying it to the exam. So I think for chemistry in the exam, a lot of your questions involve these like mathematical steps, like calculating like the pH, like from the concentration of like the H plus ions or something like that. They give you all these variables, and it can get really messy because like it's not just one question. It's like question one, part A, part B, part C, and then if you get part A wrong, then your answer in part F is wrong as well. So you can get really confused about all these variables. And what really helps is that I bring highlighters into my exams, and then you highlight the most important parts of the question, what information they give you, what information you're supposed to derive from that, and what is the final answer. What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to know? And then when you're going through that question, it's really clear. Oh, so they give you, for example, the pKa value of something. Then I find it really helpful literally to write it down myself, like in the answer box, write a very small pKa equals something, something, something. I'm making sure I've processed the information. So after that, then it's just recognizing how to tackle the question. And by writing it out yourself, it makes it so much more easy. So that would be my advice for specifically for chemistry. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Andrian.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go on to sort of other subjects. So I think the next one down the grouping list would be on the social sciences side. Anasta, you've done psychology and economics?
Yeah, HL, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So can you share a little bit on how you prepared and how you studied for these two exams?
So because like I was psychology HL, I had like 3 papers. So I'm pretty sure everyone's already like familiar with how the papers work and everything. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But I think the preparation method for the different papers is also like going to differ slightly, but there are also like some common things. So for paper 1 and paper 2 for psychology, I think it would be useful to compile a list of experiments for your biological approach, your cognitive approach, and for paper 2 also, whatever topic that your teacher has selected, you can make a list of experiments. In the IB guide, you can already see the kind of questions to expect, and it's probably going to be one of those. Like the questions are repeated on a very, very regular basis for psychology. If you look through past papers, you can definitely see a pattern. So I think making a list is very helpful, and it would also be helpful to overlap experiments so that you have to like memorize less details. So I think a few helpful experiments worked for me. They were like that of patient HM, McGuire, and like a lot of those experiments they can be used in multiple places. So it would be helpful if you found such patterns so that you can like lessen your own workload. Another thing is even if the command terms are important. So if they say explain this theory with one example, then you have to like explain the theory and like focus more on the theory than the experiment, but also mention the experiment, like don't neglect that. And even if it's an explain question, I think the 9 markers, even then go ahead and do a little bit of analysis at the end, like wrap it up nicely with 3 or 4 sentences of just analyzing the theory and analyzing the experiment. Don't like leave it hanging. So don't focus on the command term, but don't go entirely by that, is what I would recommend. Then I think also like mention the application. Yeah, okay. So for paper 2, one of the main mistakes that people make are like you have the theory, like the 22 mark questions, people just mention the theory and explain the theory very well, and then they mention the experiments very well, but they don't connect the theory to the experiment, which is the real difficult part. So examiners want to see that you know how to apply what you've learned to the studies that you're using. So make sure that you like tie everything up nicely at the end and analyze the theory, and then analyze the experiments, evaluate them. So if you do all this, like your answer is like it's very complete. Like there's everything that an examiner could possibly be looking for is there in your answer. So it's difficult for them to cut marks. It's not compulsory to know the name of the researcher and the year and everything, but I would recommend it because it shows that you know more. And also it helps to list out a couple of similar experiments in the introduction to your answers. For paper 3, I think the first 3 questions are usually very direct. Like it's literally just comprehension. You just have to read what's given to you and you can just pick out the answers from there and put it in. So like, again, make a list of research methodologies and types of studies like experiments, correlational studies and things like that. So if you make a list of those and like list out their characteristics, you know what you're going to write. So paper 3, even though it seems quite obscure because there aren't many examples on the internet, it's a new thing, so there isn't much on the internet. It's pretty easy. And when they ask you about ethical considerations, there are, I think, 6 ethical considerations that we usually write about. Make sure that you include at least 5 or preferably 6 in your answer. Even if there's nothing direct, you can still, like, use your imagination a little bit. That doesn't hurt. And also, like, for triangulation and everything, when there are questions about generalization, it would help to know a lot, like just have like pointers in your head. And for this, I would recommend that you use like multiple textbooks so that like, maybe I think I used the Pearson one. Like there are many, so I think I used, that was one of the main ones that I used. So using multiple textbooks, that really helps as well. As for economics, I think one of the main problems, like, okay, again, for economics, like studying for the 3 papers, they require like very different strategies because the papers are like so different. So for paper 1, I think the hardest part is, even if the content is easy, sometimes the time constraint, it just gets to your head and you end up like, scribbling the last 2 answers or something. So before I properly started preparing, I remember I used to panic in the exam hall and just my first answer was always good, but my second answer was always just, it was a mess. So I'd recommend, again, like in your reading time, decide, don't waste time, like decide what exactly, like when you have options, decide what you're going to write. And again, like spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes planning, and divide up the time that you have for like the 10-mark questions and the 15-mark questions and everything. Also, like for economics and psychology, actually, like Andrin said, referring to the marking scheme is very helpful because you know exactly what they're expecting of you. And as you keep doing that, you'll see that there are certain patterns to it, and that helps when you're preparing and when you're writing answers. So for economics especially, for like the 15-mark questions and even the 10-mark questions, uh, if you don't give a real life example in your answer, it is impossible for the examiner to give you the highest band. So even if your answer is like perfect, the maximum you can get is a 12 out of 15 if you don't give an example. So again, make a list of examples for like all the main concepts. For microeconomics, like maybe price flooring, price ceiling and everything. And for macroeconomics, for all the indicators, mention real world examples. So that's like very helpful. Paper 2 is like, I think it was one of my favorite papers because it was easier than paper 1. And also, like, yeah, for paper 2, I'd say make references to the text that you've been given. I used to like just put whatever was given in quotes. My teacher said it would be better if you like it's given as bullet points with numbers. It would be better if you mentioned those numbers in your answer, because then it's more clear to the examiner that you're making references to the thing. So it's not enough just to know the theory, but it's also helpful to it's also necessary that you can connect the theory to the content that's given. As for paper 3, I think one of the mistakes I made was that there are 3 questions and you have an option of choosing 2. So for my mock exam, I think I panicked in the exam hall and I attempted all 3 and ended up getting a lower score on that paper. So just a reminder for everyone, you have to attempt only 2 questions. And that's also like just keep doing past papers for that one. That's mainly what you can do, because there's not much you can study. It's more about time management there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amartya. I think that's I think just as a disclaimer, we are not making any money off any of the text or services they've been telling you guys about. But certainly these are guides that might help you as your preparation. Kelvin, you did business, right? Is it similar or different in terms of how you studied for that exam?
I think it is, because it's like humanities. I think it's pretty similar. However, I think for my personal experience, I think my learning of business management was extremely messy, because the way we learned was that we had like field trips, and then we had like PowerPoints from like random websites, and then we had debates. So I think it was really messy, and a lot of the information given to us was not really essential, and it wasn't really relevant. So I think no matter what you learn in class, I think that helps to like augment and help your understanding. But the most important thing is to have really good revision notes, because I don't think, like, I think you should base it on textbooks and syllabus. And because I don't think like there's one source that can cover the entire syllabus really well. I think you should be really careful on that. And so I think when writing your notes from your textbook, I think this is quite different from biology and chemistry, because you don't really have to list it verbatim from the mark scheme, as the mark scheme is really flexible, and it is the thought process and not the exact wording that really matters. And so so the logic and exam technique is a lot more important than the content and stuff you memorize, due to the highly subjective nature of this subject. I also found that while making notes for the syllabus, like not I think every textbook didn't really cover the syllabus directly, and it wasn't really comprehensive. So I think I would recommend using multiple revision guides and textbooks, so you can have a clear understanding of every single syllabus point like really well. And I think one important thing to note about revision notes is that I think we should try to condense notes after understanding. Like, you should really make it as condensed and as concise as possible, to make it really the bare requirements of what is needed to be remembered, like the really bare requirements. Because and then afterwards you should memorize these notes, because I think not only does this prevent like reduce your workload, but also prevents like unnecessary memorization. And I think this is special for business, because in the exam you have to elaborate on like basic principles and apply them to context. And so so your principles need to be really well understood, not the specific explanations or examples or specific wording or mark schemes. And so so one thing to bear in mind is that when I started doing past papers, I had to do a lot of changes to my notes, because none of the textbooks really aligned with the mark scheme. So I think you should really be careful and read more mark schemes, and try to get like try to match your logical flow to your answers to the mark scheme, as it really is the golden standard of what examiners want. And I found that business in the mark scheme, like the justifications, elaborations, and analysis was like extremely weird. And sometimes I really didn't get the reasoning or the logic. So I think you should really get exposed to the reasoning and understand what they're trying to say and what they want from you. And so if I'm not mistaken, I think there's one paper, I think paper 1, which consists of the case study and the QS essay. And so in the case study, I think we get maybe like a 2, 3, or 4 page document months before the exam. And I think I don't think this section has a lot to be worried about, because I think most importantly, you just have to highlight the important keywords and then link them back to like your notes. And I think you should get used to the context, but it doesn't really have to be in-depth anyways, because in the exam, they'll provide additional information that was unseen by anybody. And I think overall, this really does not require like a lot of studying for, because if you study for paper 2, then naturally all the stuff in paper 1 will come under that. And I think paper 1 is more a test of how you adapt to like the exam conditions, and also how you adapt to the new context given to you. So I don't think it really requires a lot of like practice or revision. And then the other section is the curious essay, which stands for change, culture, ethics, globalization, innovation, and strategy. I think the best way to prepare for this is because you know about this from the start of year 1. So I think you should prepare for every topic and just have like a few examples per topic to elaborate on. And I think in the exam recently, from like 2018 to 2019, so before 2018, they would just say, how does culture link with ethics? And it was extremely broad and extremely easy, because you could simply write about anything you want within those areas. However, right now they made it, I personally found that they made it really hard because they would mention like, how does ethics in the manufacturing process affect the change in marketing? And so they would reference specific like functions of the business. And I found this to be extremely hard. And so I think it really depends on luck as well. But I think you're prepared to be adaptable and make links between these topics in the exam. And I think one important thing to note is that in terms of context, I think it's better to provide specific details such as like dates and financial transactions and the names of the various stakeholders, because not only will this impress the examiner, it's also very crucial to show that you really understand the context and the content. And I think overall, this might be a bit controversial, but I think quantity over quality like any day, because I think in terms of this paper, the marks are given relatively easily. And so you really don't need to have a comprehensive or very in-depth analysis. Because although I think it's a 15-mark or a 20-mark question, like each argument is worth 2 or 3 marks. So you really do not need to write really in-depth. However, what you really need to do is to write 2 topics, like 2 themes, I think, including the for and against. And so I think you really need to write really fast, come prepared, and a lot of content needs to be written. And I think it's better to be underdeveloped than not written at all. So I'd rather have 4 sections moderately well done than having 2 sections really well done. And I think for paper 2, it's like the generic paper, and it requires a good understanding of your notes. And the hardest bit is application. And as I said before, like past papers are the best resource. So you memorize your revision notes as the backbone and kind of foundation of your knowledge, and then use the past papers to get a feel of what the examiners want and kind of the logical flow of understanding and reasoning that they want, which I found was pretty weird at times. And I think for business, paper 2, I think finance takes a large proportion of it. So I think, and it's extremely disproportional because it's just one topic or one chapter out of the entire textbook. However, they have an entire section dedicated to finance. And this tends to be the hardest topic for a lot of students. So I think just make sure it's perfect and make sure you know all the calculations really well, because these are like free and easy marks that maybe not a lot of people would get. And I think business practice makes perfect, and speed is a really crucial skill to be learned. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Calvin. You talked about the 20 marker just now, and we have a follow-up question on how do you approach the 10 marker. Can you talk a little bit about it?
The 10 marker for like which paper? I'm not really sure.
He simply said for business.
Oh, sure. So I'll assume it's paper 2, but so I think 10 markers are by far the hardest question they could ever give. And for all my practices from like year 1 to year 2, the highest I got was like a 6, and the average I got was like a 4 out of 10. Because I think because like for the amount of marks they give, they give you like for the content and the understanding they want you to give, the marks given is not really like proportional, and so it's like a lot harder. And so I think where you lose marks usually is the structure, because in order to have 10 marks, you need to have everything really well developed. You need to have like an introduction, and also I think you need to evaluate, have a conclusion, and evaluate on like possible practices and possible like further implications and solutions. And also within that, you need to apply back to the case study, and you need to have context. So I think it's a really hard question.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. And we also have some questions on history. So I think, Andrian, you took history. Can you briefly talk about it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I took history standard level, just a disclaimer. So when I took it, there was 2 papers, and then for higher level, there should be 3 papers. So I can't really comment on the higher level paper 3. But the paper 1 and paper 2, I think most of the advice I can give is quite like, it's universal, right? So for paper 1, when I did it, it was mostly a source-based paper. So it's actually possible, although it's kind of unlikely, to get 20 out of 24 marks without any of your own knowledge, because 20 of those 24 marks is actually from the source itself. So that's that one paper. I think the 2 key things you need to really have down as skills is how to analyze a source and your time management, because you don't really have that much time for that paper. But what I want to kind of focus on is how to tackle paper 2. I think actually history was, I was really interested in history, I still am, but it was one of the toughest subjects for me to tackle because of that time limit, and also because of just you're trying to write a really good argumentative essay. So it was actually surprising to me that my approach towards the end of the exam was really quality over quantity. Sorry, Calvin. Like, it's the other way around for history. I spent a lot of the time, like I spent about 15 to 20 minutes planning the essay for history for paper 2, because it's asking you to argue a view, whether you like agree or disagree, or it's like an interpretation of history. And I found what was really helpful was that you definitely have to be really, definitely have to make an argument, and you have to support it really well with evidence. But then the actual, like the really factual evidence only makes up some part of it, because what actually supports your argument would be interpretations of the events. Like, so it's historiography. So a lot of famous historians would have their own takes on, you know, like Germany's rise to power, or like you know, like the Cultural Revolution, stuff like that, because I did the stream where it was authoritarian single party states. So what I did was that I would read wider, and I would read about how these historians, their general view of the events, or like how they interpreted it. And not only did I try to bring some of those views into the essay, I actually used 2 or 3 sentences to critique that view. Like, you actually critique those famously held views, whether you think they are valid, whether it supports your point, or whether you say, one may argue, as maybe Kershaw argued, like blah, 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 right? Like, but you don't think it's like necessarily correct. That's actually valuable as well within your essay, because if your critique matches your stance in your argument, then you're using different sources to support your argument, to demonstrate your understanding and your use of the information to build an argument for your interpretation. And that's basically what history, like the paper is. You're trying to show your understanding, and you're trying to defend an argument and defend an interpretation, like through the use of, you know, like your historical knowledge. So yeah, that would be my advice for history. And I remember in year 12, like the first year of IB, like I would be trying to basically churn out these like at least 3-page essays, right? Like for history. But then towards the end, towards my finals exams, it's a big realization, but you don't have to write that much for the history for the paper. You have like 45 minutes, I think, around for each essay, and you have to write 2 essays back to back. So yeah, like in those 45 minutes, I spent a chunk of that planning. And in the end, I actually handed in my final paper. Each essay was about 1.5 pages only. It wasn't actually that long, but it was enough to cover and defend an argument and consider both sides of the argument as well. So yeah, definitely for history, quality over quantity. Make sure you know your historical facts, but then at the same time, not just the fact itself, but then how it's interpreted. Yeah, and one more thing. It's impossible for you to know every single minute detail of every single minute or every single day that happened, maybe during the Cold War or something like that. I find be efficient with what you learn. Try and learn some things, some big events that have these multiple interpretations, or that apply to the questions that most likely will come up. Then you can use them in multiple arguments as well. So you're trying to be efficient in what you learn. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, I think we've covered actually a lot of different subjects, and there are actually many more for the IB diploma. And I don't think we could cover all of them. We have the 3 very great students here, but I don't think they have covered studied all the subjects available here in the IB. We do, in the interest of time, I do want to say we're going to sort of wrap up a little bit. Before we leave though, I would want to see if we can hear from you. What was your favorite thing to do to relax in the very busy study schedule before the exam? What was the one thing you did that absolutely helped you the most? Anaka, you look like you're ready to answer this one.
Me?
Yeah.
What did you say, Andrew?
What did you do? What did you do to relax? Right before, like, you know, one thing that you did to relax before the exam.
I used to make sure that even though I was like studying, I'd make sure that I'd spent like 1 hour on working out, because that's something that I've been doing like for a long time. So I never really compromised on that, even like towards the end. Like, don't do something that's going to tire you out so much. Like, but then I did, and it differs for different people. So like, if you are into playing an instrument or like you relax in some other way, go for it. Like, don't compromise on those things just because you have to study. Yeah.
Kevin?
I think it's a bit similar. So I think I mostly relied on exercise to release my stress. So like it completely allowed me to like forget about studying and to prevent me from being too engulfed by the workload, as it could clear a lot of my like anxieties and worries. And I found that not only was it not a waste of time, but it actually made me a lot more efficient in terms of studying, because it gave me something to like look forward to, and therefore really improved my motivation, lifted my mood, and also because I could look forward to something, and instead of staying at home all day, this would also increase like my sense of urgency, and would also increase like my my pace and also the speed at which I could complete a task, because like I know like, oh, I only have 2 hours left, I better like speed up to complete this past paper, instead of like saying, oh, I have 12 hours till like 2 a.m. so I'll just slowly do it. So I think that helped me a lot.
Great. Andrea?
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's really similar. I'm lucky because I live somewhere really close that I can run to. And the easiest sort of sports you can do is just to get up and go for a run. And because you have something to look forward to, it actually gives you a lot of rhythm, and it gives you like a pace in the day. Like, oh, you're not just gonna try your best and slog through all these questions in what, like 12 to 16 hours. Like, you actually have a set schedule. Okay, now I'll do this, now I'll go for a run. And then after you go for a run, I think like for me, it feels better, right? Like you just feel like you've accomplished something aside from just studying, because it always feels like the notes are never ending. There's always some question to finish. And sometimes you might have worked the entire day, yet you still feel unproductive. So doing something that gives you a sense of accomplishment, no matter how small, helps you have that motivation. And I think, yeah, there's a phrase that someone once told me. It's that action begets motivation, not the other way around. Because once you start doing something, you naturally want to finish it, right? Action begets motivation. If it's the other way around, motivation begets action, then you're basing your motivation on the emotional urge or like the urgency to study for an exam, and that doesn't come consistently, right? Like if you're going to rely on emotion to motivate you for the exam, then it's not going to be reliable, or it's not going to be consistent. And yeah, you most likely won't do as well as you can. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think one question, and this will be our last question before we sign off, Lily. Right now you're all students. Many of you have to experience online teaching because of the current situation. Any hints on how you manage your screen time? Any hints on how you try to stay focused when a lot of things are done online right now? And we talked about this a little bit amongst ourselves before we started today. And we certainly know there are challenges in it. But what did you think can help you stay focused when there is less in-person contact in this situation?
Okay, so what I do is, wait, you're asking about how we manage to stay focused because of like during online learning, right?
Yeah.
What I do is usually I make checklists because like Andrian just mentioned, that small feeling of accomplishment each time you do something that actually like propels you to like do more. So I make checklists and I make sure that I distribute it over all my university subjects. So as I work through the checklist over the day, I feel like, okay, I have to get all this done before I go to bed. So that way, like, I get my things done. So that's like motivation to keep me going.
Okay. Any other hints? I think it sounds similar to what Kelvin was mentioning earlier as well in how he prepared for his IB exam, as well with the checklist and specific tasks for each day.
I think for trying to keep yourself motivated or trying to keep that that momentum going, there's also that factor of trying to keep yourself accountable to the tasks that you set out to accomplish. So yeah, like a to-do list or a checklist would be one of the ways to do it. Another way that I found to be useful is like, I know social gatherings aren't recommended in the current outbreak situation. So maybe I would, call or like Skype call like a friend or two, and then we would set out like a plan to like achieve, or like we're gonna do a small study session together, and we hold each other accountable. So like you're not just tempted to just go nap or be like, oh, I'll save this until later, because it's easy to just play the video on double speed or something like that. Another thing that I've done recently is one of those apps where you kind of do a timer and then you're not allowed to touch the phone. If you touch the phone, then there's like it's like that, like the punishment. It's called Forest. But it's really cool because like if you accumulate coins, you can actually buy a real tree to plant. And I think, yeah, it's slightly addictive, but it's addictive in a good sense. I'm focused on trying to not touch my phone, and then I would feel guilty if I weren't touching my phone, but still doing something that's not productive. So that's how I hold myself accountable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess for me, like one way I dealt with like the screen time, because I think a lot of IB was based on like learning through laptops or learning through monitors and like presentations by your teachers. I think one way to like combat that was that like all my notes were handwritten, and that might not be feasible in university, but I think for IB it was feasible. And so all my notes were like in a written like book, and also like I revised by also writing out my notes through like questions. And then and also like I think one really important thing that helped me was printing out past papers, because I think online past papers is not as effective, as you don't really get the real feel of like writing and like testing yourself like through like your handwriting, also your time management. But also like if you use like online past papers, I think like YouTube or Netflix is only like one tab away. So I think whenever you meet like a really hard question, you just go like, I don't want to do this anymore, and you just go away. But like what I did was like I print out like stacks of past papers, and I'd like put my phone and my laptop away, and I'd literally like just put it on my desk. And so like all I had on my desk was like past papers, like pencils and pen. And so that really helped me stay focused by removing like distractions, I think. Yeah.
Great. So, thank you guys. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I hope we managed to provide some advice to the soon-to-be IB exam takers in about 2 months' time. So, for those of you who have questions on the comments that we did not manage to get to, we will be getting to you in writing a little bit later in the day on the week as well, but we will get back to you to some of the questions you might have, or we might ask the students for their advice as well in their comments on how they can further help you. So thank you guys for your advice. Anyone have any sort of one last word for the exam takers, cheering them on, support, anything you want to say to these guys? Come on.
I think first of all, good luck to everyone, because like IB exams are really like one of the most stressful times of like your lives. And I think I can't stress this like anymore, but I think especially for year one IB students, I think really efficient study techniques are crucial, because when I first started like studying in IB, I was a bit like clueless as to how to study, and so like maybe like I would be like all over the place. But I think some YouTubers such as like maybe like Ali Abdal, they kind of really explain like study techniques really well. And so like I really wish I'd known of him sooner because like his principles that he said are like really like proven and they're like the most efficient way to study. And so maybe like active recall, spaced repetition, like you guys should look them up. But yeah, this can like really save a lot of time and can like really fight off like losing like or like forgetting stuff because like over the 2 years you're bound to forget a lot of stuff. But however, like if you use these techniques, you can really like make your like knowledge of the content like stronger and stronger until like you're really prepared for the exams instead of like cramming for the exams. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Calvin.
Yeah, like good luck everyone. I'm pretty sure that if you have like a study schedule and you stick to it and you're focused and everything, it's not as hard as it seems. It seems overwhelming, but it's really not. If you have a structure and if you work hard, I think everybody can do well. And also, if you have any like questions or anything, feel free to like hit me up on my social media. It's on my Facebook actually. So maybe I can like help you out. If you need anything, feel free to contact me.
Yeah, I guess like just kind of differing messages for like maybe year one, year two. For year ones, like you're just starting IB, well, like you're almost finishing your first year of IB. It's really important that you develop good study habits and some sort of like, to some extent, self-discipline, because it's always easier to keep doing what you're doing instead of like making such a drastic change so close to the exams. For year two, that doesn't mean that it's a hopeless case, you know, like just it's so close to the exams, but then I know it's really tempting to feel like you've already done so much and you're almost towards the end and you're so tired, but you've already come this far, you know, like this is it. This is like the final bit of the entire journey, and you didn't come this far just to come this far, to quote a really famous, like a popular quote. I think the way to look at it is the exams will come eventually. There's no delaying it, or there might be delaying it, but they will always come. It's, you can't really control it. The only thing you can control is how prepared you are for the exams, right? So you need to work and try your best to to change what you can control. And with that, you will be able to do as best as you can. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Once again, thank you very much for your time and for your great advices to the students. I'm sure you guys, the students have mentioned they're happy to answer any questions. Our student panel is happy to answer any questions you might have afterwards. So we might be reaching out to these guys as well for any of the questions you have written down, but we did not get back to you yet. So that will be the end of the live today. Hopefully, you guys find it helpful. If there are any other questions, feel free to reach out. We will be trying to get to you and provide support as you need to grow the exam as best as we can. So thank you again to Andrea, to Anaka, and to Kelvin, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.